Welcome to the Kingdom Saga, a journey into the story of the king, his realm, and the world to come. If you're new here, this channel exists to restore the concrete, breathtaking reality of the kingdom Jesus proclaimed. If this message awakens something in you, consider joining us as we rediscover the world behind the words of Scripture. Now, Chapter 1: The Kingdom We Forgot. Why Christians Lost the Kingdom. For many believers today, the kingdom of heaven has become an idea rather than a homeland. We speak of God's rule, His reign, His dominion. But the domain of that kingdom, the realm Jesus came from and returned to, has faded into abstraction. Modern Christianity inherited a thin, vague picture of heaven: clouds, halos, endless singing, and disembodied spirits drifting in a spiritual fog. No wonder believers struggle to feel excitement, longing, or anticipation for the age to come. A vague heaven cannot stir desire. A shapeless future cannot anchor hope. A metaphorical kingdom cannot command allegiance. But this was not the vision Jesus preached. Jesus spoke of a kingdom, a real one. A kingdom with a king, a capital city, a government, a culture, a population, and a future more solid than the ground beneath our feet. He described houses, banquets, cities, rewards, rulership, and a world so real that he physically ascended into it and will physically return from it. The apostles continued this message, speaking of citizenship, crowns, nations, inheritance, territory, and a coming age where resurrected people rule with Christ. To them, the kingdom was not a metaphor. It was a homeland, a country, a realm, a world. But somewhere along the way, the church lost this vision. And to understand how, we must go back to the beginning. Imagine the early church, not as stained glass saints or distant historical figures, but as real men and women, dusty-footed travelers, fishermen with calloused hands, widows with weathered faces, young believers with fire in their eyes. They gathered in homes, caves, courtyards, and open fields, sitting close together as lamps flickered and bread was broken. Their hearts burned with a single expectation, whispered again and again: the King is coming back. They spoke of heaven the way travelers speak of home, not as an idea, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual mood, but as a country, a realm with borders, beauty, government, and glory. They believed Jesus had come from that realm, stepped into our world, returned to his homeland in a resurrected body, and would one day appear again from the same place. When they said citizenship, they meant it literally. When they said crown, they meant a real reward. When they said city, they meant a place with streets, gates, foundations, and life. To them, the kingdom of heaven was as real as Rome, only greater. You can almost see them, a small group huddled in a dimly lit room, speaking of the New Jerusalem as though they had already walked its streets. A widow lifting her eyes toward the sky, imagining the king returning in glory. A young believer whispering, "We will reign with him in the age to come." This was their imagination. This was their worldview. This was their hope. The kingdom was not distant. It was near. It was certain. It was the future country they longed for with every breath. But over time, something happened. Something subtle, something slow, something that reshaped the imagination of the church. As the gospel spread into the Greek-speaking world, it collided with a radically different way of seeing reality. Greek philosophy taught that the spiritual was non-physical, non-material, non-geographical. The physical world was inferior. Bodies were temporary prisons. Matter was something to escape, not something to inherit. The Hebrew worldview saw creation as good, bodies as essential, and the earth as the future home of the redeemed. But the Greek worldview saw creation as flawed, bodies as burdens, and the earth as something to transcend. And so, little by little, the concrete became abstract. The kingdom shifted from domain to dominion, from a place to a principle. Heaven shifted from homeland to state of being. The resurrection shifted from bodily hope to spiritual metaphor. The age to come shifted from future world to timeless idea. The early church did not abandon the kingdom intentionally. It drifted away from it gradually. By the Middle Ages, heaven had become a cloud-filled afterlife, halos, harps, endless singing. The biblical vision of a renewed earth, resurrected bodies, and a real kingdom faded into the background. The New Jerusalem became symbolic. The resurrection became spiritualized. The age to come became allegory. Heaven became a place where souls floated, not a world where people lived. By the modern era, Christians inherited a heaven that felt more like a mood than a country. A feeling, a destination without geography, a future without form. Ask the average believer to describe heaven and you'll hear a place of peace, a spiritual realm, a state of being with God. But rarely, a city with foundations, a world renewed, a kingdom with government, culture, and territory. When heaven becomes vague, the kingdom becomes irrelevant. You cannot long for what you cannot picture. You cannot desire what you cannot imagine. You cannot hope for a world you cannot see. The early church longed for the kingdom because they could imagine it. The modern church struggles because it has lost the picture, and the cost of losing the kingdom is immense. When heaven becomes vague, hope becomes vague, thin, fragile, sentimental, unable to sustain suffering or sacrifice. When the future becomes abstract, purpose becomes abstract. When the kingdom becomes symbolic, discipleship becomes optional. When the age to come becomes mystical, the present age becomes ultimate. The church did not lose the kingdom because it lacked faith. It lost the kingdom because it lacked imagination. Imagination shaped by Scripture rather than philosophy. But Scripture refuses to let the kingdom be reduced to fog. The kingdom was never meant to be vague. It was meant to be real, solid, tangible, anticipated. Jesus did not preach a symbolic kingdom. He preached a coming world, a restored earth, a resurrected humanity, a city descending from heaven, a king returning in glory, a government established forever. The apostles did not die for metaphors. They died for a kingdom they believed would fill the earth. This is why part 1 begins with rediscovery, because only by understanding what slipped from our grasp can we recover the hope, purpose, and anticipation that defined the early believers. We must rediscover the reality of the kingdom, the geography of heaven, the physicality of resurrection, the future of the world, the government of the king, the destiny of the redeemed. The kingdom is not gone. It is waiting to be seen again, waiting to be imagined again, waiting to be preached again, waiting to be longed for again. And once you see it, truly see it, you cannot unsee it. Once the kingdom becomes real again, concrete, embodied, territorial, glorious, everything changes. Scripture comes alive, hope becomes solid, purpose becomes clear, discipleship becomes urgent, the future becomes radiant. This chapter is the doorway. What comes after is the journey. The kingdom is not lost. It is waiting to be rediscovered, and the moment you see it, truly see it, the world will never look the same. If this message stirred something in you, consider subscribing to the Kingdom Saga. There is so much more to uncover, and the journey has only just begun.